I might have decided to keep going. Extroversion. So we're going to talk about each of these big five. Extroversion is being warm, gregariousness, assertive, active, excitement-seeking, dominant, optimistic, ambitious. You tend to react less so to sensory stimuli. There are a lot of advantages to being extroverted, so on average you tend to have higher status. You tend to be rated as more popular and physically attractive, regardless of how you actually look. You tend to have more positive emotions, like joy, happiness, stuff like that. But there are some major disadvantages too. Like, for each of these traits, I'm going to talk about some pros and cons. There's no universal good trait to have. There are downsides to all traits. So, in terms of disadvantage, mate poaching, which I find is a fascinating one, because, like, it wouldn't have occurred to me immediately, because I don't do a lot of research on extroversion particularly. I'm more of a conscientiousness and neuroticism kind of gal. But extroversion has this challenge with mate poaching, so you're more likely to have others attempt to steal you away. So if you're extroverted, you go out to parties, and so like you're just more likely to meet other people. So you're more likely to be poached away from your romantic partner. You tend to be more argumentative. You tend to need to be in control more, and tend to have more time management issues, which might be because you're attending all the parties and wanting to go with all the people. Now, you're also highly sensitive to rewards, and so like rewards will have a stronger incentive on you. So, cats who are extroverted are actually more incentivized by treats. We'll see how fast Tuki can be summoned. Tuki is a fairly extroverted cat. He's here. He has been summoned. So yeah. And you get to experience more positive emotion. Positive emotion, pretty nice. I'd like to say it's a positive. Okay. So, next trait, neuroticism. It's kind of the yin to the yang of extroversion. They aren't on the same factor. Like, they aren't on the same scale. You can be both. So, neuroticism is characterized by emotional instability as well as negative emotionality, including, like, hostile, self-conscious, impulsive, on average tend to be a little less effective at problem solving. You tend to have negative reactions to stress. You're more sensitive. If you have someone who is higher on neuroticism. Hello. No? Oh, I've been shunned. Higher on neuroticism, you're more sensitive to social threats. It's also negatively correlated with happiness, well-being, and physical health. So, it's not the most fun, positive trait to have. However, and there's this general tendency towards psychopathology and mental illness. People who have more neuroticism on average are more likely to have issues related to their mental health. But it's not deterministic. They happen to share similar genes, and so if you have the genes that are related to neuroticism, like there are genes in common between neuroticism and mental health. It's not like neuroticism causes poor mental health or poor mental health causes neuroticism. There are genes that cause both. Now, more in terms of, I'm sorry that this is like the super fun trait. Hi, Tukes. So problems with family relationships, you tend to be more dissatisfied with jobs, you tend to commit more crimes, or at least be caught for more crimes, have shorter lives. So a lot of not so fun things. However, there's this really cool thing this really cool concept called healthy neuroticism. So if you're both conscientious, and we'll get there, and neurotic, you'll live longer than if you were just conscientious. So you get all the boost of conscientiousness and none of the life loss, but only if you have both. And it's because you're kind of stressing about your life and your health, and you focus on it a lot, and then you go do something about it. Yeah. Now, sometimes this trait is called emotional stability, and so high levels of neuroticism are mapped onto low levels of emotional stability. It's kind of that idea. So their correlation is -1, so up in one, down in the other. Hi, Tooks. I'm slightly regretting my choice to turn Tukey into an extroversion prop. So conscientiousness is all about being competent, dutiful, achievement-striving, self-discipline. It's positively related to integrity tests. It's often used to select employees. It's a decent measure of responsibility, of long-term job commitment, moral reasoning, and so on. Obviously, there are some problems with this type of measure, and I've talked about. And there's argument that they're less biased than aptitude tests. So there are racial differences in performance on a lot of cognitive ability and achievement tests that you don't see among African Americans and Anglos when you use kind of measures of personality. So there don't seem to be racial differences in that aspect for most personality tests, most tests of conscientiousness, which has its advantages, although there's been less test development funding and money spent on developing good personality tests. So it is possible that there might be racial differences. We know there are gender differences, but we don't spend the manpower and the resources to find them. So it's possible. I'll give Funder the benefit of the doubt. He is more of an expert in this area than I am. Conscientiousness is also a really great predictor of your own job performance, as well as absenteeism. So you're less likely to call in sick or just be absent if you have higher levels of conscientiousness. There's a -0.3 correlation. So it's a decent size effect. Higher levels of conscientiousness, lower levels of absenteeism. They're also, so when I say associated with job performance, so supervisor ratings of performance are positively associated with conscientiousness of 0.4. Still pretty big. They also predict jobs performance for your spouse. So if you're conscientious, and this holds up in both like old school, like my weird 1930s data sets, as well as modern data sets like the HILDA, which comes from Australia, where they found that your spouse's level of conscientiousness, regardless of whether that spouse is working or not, improves your own performance, which I think is kind of cool. So, again, part of the reason why I've spent so much time on conscientiousness is I know more about it, and I use it more. So that's part of the aspects here. Like conscientiousness and intelligence are my go-tos. So conscientiousness predicts success in college at least comparable levels to the SAT and your high school GPA. Within a class, on average, like everybody at Wake Forest is super smart, super talented. And so within a class, conscientiousness is a better predictor because everybody's at a really good ability. So it's also might explain motivation in general. So higher levels of conscientiousness associated with wanting to learn, might be associated with wanting to learn more about their employer and acquire new skills and knowledge to seek information before an interview. I wrote acquire new skills twice. Less likely to procrastinate, although not always. You can be very industrious, but also be a procrastinator. because you're just really optimistic about your abilities in the future. I'm not talking about anyone I know. Alright, so, you're, some downsides though are you're more likely to feel guilty when you don't do the stuff that you think you ought to be doing, especially when you don't meet expectations that either you set for yourself or others have set for you. You tend to be less popular and less creative. Now, you do tend to live longer. Most likely this is because you're avoiding riskier behaviors like smoking or overeating, and you tend to engage in health-promoting behaviors such as exercise. In addition, there can be indirect effects. So people who are higher on conscientiousness also tend to do better at their jobs and make more money and be more educated, which is linked to income. And so conscientiousness can also improve health by increasing their access to resources. So, like, there's indirect effects. It's not just like conscientiousness direct. You avoid that motorcycle, or you put on the mask. Stuff like that. It's also positively correlated with number of years of school. And depending on how you measure it, it doesn't seem to be correlated strongly. It's got a tiny weak correlation with IQ. And that tiny weak correlation is most likely based on more like factors related to testing rather than like actual ability. And so feel free to hit me up in office hours if you want to know more about the weird relationship between conscientiousness and intelligence. It's weird and cool. Alright, so agreeableness. So this is the kind of fourth of our 5 factors. Conformity, friendly compliance, likability, warmth, love, all those warm, fuzzy things. Like, these are all different ways to describe this trait. In general, people are cooperative, they're easy to get along with, they rate others more positively. Interestingly, they tend to smoke less. And why that is, I've had this explained to me multiple times. It's like some weird wonky relationship that I might ask Veronica Cole, who does some research on smoking behavior. She might be able to answer this question that I've had answered for me many times. But yeah, so also women tend to be higher on this trait than men. Okay. So so there's some weird interventions that are related to agreeableness. So like among children, agreeable kids are less vulnerable and less likely to be bullied. That doesn't mean that the bullies will just not bully anyone. They just won't bully the agreeable kid. And so there are some interventions out there that aim on improving to reduce like bullying by trying to encourage everyone to be more agreeable. I have some serious reservations about that approach to this intervention. I would rather have, and this is my own personal opinion, I understand that it works, and I'm not someone who studies bullying in great detail. I would rather you have students just intervene on the bullies, not on the victims, to teach the potential victims how to be less appealing as a victim. Again, it's my personal opinion. So in terms of life outcomes, you tend to be more involved in religious activities, at least in the United States. You're on average more psychologically well-adjusted. You tend to have a healthier heart. And you are more likely to recover quickly from accidents and illness. Last but not least, the weirdest of the big 5 is openness. There's even debate on this name. It's a fairly controversial trait. Some folks call it creativity, imagination, artisticness. Actually, no, I lied. Let me back up. So, openness to experience or intellect are the 2 big names for this trait. It's the most controversial. A lot of people debate on which it is, and I would probably argue that it's both of those 2 major aspects, which is what they are. kind of fall into this. So openness, intellect, same, but there's debate. A lot of debate among like super senior scholars who clearly have nothing better to do. But people higher on this trait, whatever you want to call it, are viewed by others as creative, imaginative, artistic, open-minded, and clever. It is positively associated with intelligence, but not determinatively so. The joke I kind of make about this trait is it's about whether you think you're smart and intellectual rather than what the reality is. So you can be dumb as a post, but still be super open-minded and think you're like the smartest person ever. So you'll score really highly. But on average, people who score highly on intelligence tests and are more likely to have higher levels of openness. There's also an association between political liberalism and openness. So there are different ways to view this trait. As kind of an appreciation of intellectual matters, or basic intelligence. I disagree with, like, the correlation's not high enough for them to be the same thing. How you value culture, intelligence, culture stuff, creativity and perceptiveness. It's the like cool new ideas trait. This trait is the least replicable, so the least able to be replicated across samples and cultures. It's pretty fragile, and it's, statistically speaking, how the factor structure works, it's the weakest, the smallest trait. It struggles a bit. When I'm feeling really grumpy, I call it the not otherwise specified trait. But it has some fun fun things associated with it. Like belief in UFOs, astrology, ghosts, all way higher when you're at higher levels of openness. So you're just open to new ideas. In terms of life outcomes, you're way more likely to try drugs of all flavors. Higher on this trait. You're more likely to have artistic interests. Higher levels of openness are actually associated with greater success at being a jazz musician. And interestingly, I should have mentioned this in the conscientiousness piece, it's also lower levels of conscientiousness are also associated with greater success in jazz. Now, you also have an increased rate of divorce, and that seems to surprise some people, and I think it boils down to you're still looking around for alternatives. You're more willing to explore other people. Now, we're almost done with this chunk, I swear. The universality. How universal is the Big Five? So when translated into other languages, including Japanese, Hebrew, German, so like translating the words and then like for each of the items of the Big Five and then refactor analyzing them, you tend to get 4 or 5. Take a wild guess which factor doesn't always show up. It rhymes with openness. Now, when you start with other languages, so they've done this with the Chinese, which is a really tough ask given how the language is so differently, like it's character kind of based. There's some overlap, but not clear one-to-one correspondence. But there's a lot of cool work to be done. Now, what I think is really fun is that the scores vary. Like within the United States, there's variability by geographic region. So agreeableness, so wherever the darker color is where there's higher levels. So agreeable folks are more likely to be in the South and Midwest. Conscientious people are more likely to be in the South. Open-minded folks are more likely to be in California, Colorado, and New York. And neurotic people, New York. And the kind of Atlantic here. Oops. I like to zoom in on this one. So darker colors mean higher average scores. So this was made in 2008, this diagram, and I can't recall if this is before or after legalization, but part of me wants to believe, and feel free to tell me, like, if anyone wants to do some homework and, like, post it, please let me know. And I imagine that there's probably even an interesting research study there to see if open-mindedness increased after legalization. So, beyond the Big Five. So there's a lot of criticism of the Big Five. There's more to personality than these 5 traits. Many other attributes, such as honesty/humility, are not encompassed within the Big Five. The Hexaco model includes this 6th factor of honesty and humility. You may have heard about it in your other classes. In your intro class, if you took this class with, like, Will Fleeson, who's really big into the Hexaco, I don't disagree that, like, that 6th factor is interesting. I just don't personally find it interesting. Probably not the most compelling reason, but for me, it doesn't add much predictive validity to the research questions I'm interested in about long-term outcomes like health and longevity or economic success. I could see it being really beneficial in, like, certain subsets, but it's, like, I fully acknowledge the Big Five is not universal in terms of, like, all-encompassing. Like, where do other traits fit in? So I've talked and grumbled a little about intelligence and how it doesn't really fit nicely in here. It's orthogonal to all the Big Five, mostly. Kind of fits with openness, but not really. So how do other traits fit in? These are big burning questions. Trying to characterize other traits, even like narcissism, like as combinations of Big Five, often leaves out important concepts in the essence of the trait. Like narcissism about being selfish and focused on you. That doesn't fit nicely into the Big Five. So, yeah. Like, it's not perfect. It doesn't capture, it wasn't the magic bullet for the, like, one big theory, but at least it gave us something to help orient us. Like, so you can put other stuff in there and even be like, well, this doesn't fit nicely into the Big Five. But still, having that Big Five allows you to be like, okay, well, this doesn't fit. Interesting. That still gives you some structure to help with. Next time, we are going to talk about personality types, because I know that that's what a lot of you expected this class to be about Myers-Briggs, and about the Enneagram with the numbers, or as you may imagine, the fact that I was struggling to call them what they're called is indicative of how often they're used in personality psychology. They have some uses, but not a ton. But not totally irrelevant. So, next time, we're going to talk about types. So, I will see you then. And, thanks for watching. Bye.